Salut Sabine, how are you?
Hello, Jamie. I'm fine. And you?
Very good, thanks. Very good. Thank you for making the time to join this series of Sentientist Conversations. And also thanks for agreeing to do this conversation in English, because trust me, if we did it in French, the quality would drop very fast indeed. But although it might be quite amusing to hear me try. Yeah, so it's great to have the chance to talk to you. And as this series of conversations are really about the two deepest philosophical questions: what's real, how should we understand the universe, and what matters? And I'm framing them in a simple worldview called Sentientism, which I'm suggesting should take a naturalistic approach to deciding what's real. We think about evidence and reason as the basis for our beliefs. And when it comes to what matters, the clue is in the name. We focus on sentience, the capacity to experience suffering or flourishing, and we should have compassion and moral consideration for every being that is sentient. But I'm talking to people in these conversations who disagree with or agree with that philosophy. So it'll be interesting to hear your own personal story and learn a little bit more about your work and your thinking. But before we get onto those two deep questions, how would you best introduce yourself and the things you work on?
First, thank you very much, Jamie. I'm really happy to participate in this inspiring series. I'm Sabine Brels. I have a PhD in international animal law from Laval University in Quebec, Canada. And my PhD focused on the evolution and globalization of animal welfare law around the world and worldwide. 7 years ago, I co-founded the Global Animal Law Organization with Antoine Goetschel, where I had the chance to give life to three main projects. The first one is the Global Animal Welfare Legislation Database, where I could list all the animal welfare legislation worldwide at national, European, and international level. I also created an expert group of now more than 100 animal lawyers from all around the world in the 5 continents. I'm really happy about that. The best animal lawyers from all around the world gathered in a family with a common mission is really powerful. So yes, I'm really glad of this project. And the last one is the UN Convention on Animal Health and Protection. It's a project for a convention at the United Nations for better protecting animal health and protection, also in conjunction with human and environmental health and welfare. So under this new principle and approach, which is critically needed nowadays to consider the interlinkages between human, animal, and environmental health and welfare. So yes, you may have heard about this One Health, One Welfare principle, which is quite important. And recently I had to leave GAL, and I have now the chance to collaborate with the new World Federation for Animals as a legal advisor on the best way to make animal protection a new global and legal concern at the United Nations. So this is really, I would say, my mission, and I'm really happy to contribute to make this world a better place for the animals through the law, as I feel it's a tool for justice for all.
Brilliant, thank you. And we'll return to those themes of the role the law can play and also global governance institutions can play in making the world better for us and non-human animals too, when we talk about the future at the end of the conversation. But it's interesting to start in these conversations with people's personal philosophical journeys. And the first of those questions is a fundamental one: what's real and how do we choose what to believe? And for many of my guests, that's a story about whether they grew up in a more naturalistic, atheistic, agnostic, sort of scientific-minded context, or one that was more spiritual or religious or supernatural in its basis. So it would be fascinating to know your story. You can wind the clock back as far as you like and tell us where you've got to now on that side of your philosophy.
Yes, thank you. So it's a good question that I'm not used to answer, but I like to answer you here. It's more personal indeed. And I'm always very interested myself to know why people are doing what they are doing. I think it's the root cause motivation of what we are doing. So I guess it's very important, and sometimes we miss it. And so you don't. Thank you very much.
And I find it interesting for two reasons. One, just intellectually, I'm interested in understanding the world. So I'm interested in ways of doing that. But I'm also interested because of how it links to our second topic, what matters morally as well, and how epistemology or our thinking about the nature of reality can influence our morality too. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know that sort of more personal story, if you don't mind.
Yes, I had the chance to grow up with a wonderful grandmother who could show me the beauty of the natural world and who also teach me, in the sense, the sacred beauty of the natural world, why it's so precious and why we have to care for other beings and the natural elements. So she already had this kind of wisdom that I had the chance to learn with her. And when I was young, I remember I was passionate to read books with her on animal species biology and going into the garden to observe nature and animals with her, who explained me the natural life and the natural processes. And I was like, so curious and so fascinated by the beauty and the intelligence of nature. Yes, so they are a very precious souvenir of mine, and I really cherish them. And they also made me who I am now, for sure. Concerning what is real for me, I think that I believe in but I also believe in what we can't see, but which are kind of obvious. So for me, for instance, I do believe in the soul of my cat when I look into her eyes. Yeah. but I also believe in the invisible interlinkages between all the natural kingdoms. So even if we don't see them, really, we have obvious manifestations of their existence. And now with the COVID-19 crisis, we have still a strong wake-up call for humanity to realize these strong interconnections between humans, animals, and nature, according to me.
Yeah, interesting. And was there any formal religious context to your background, or was it more one of this connection with the natural world and a sort of sense of reverence and sacredness outside of a religious context?
This is outside of a religious context. However, I also went to the Catholic class when I was young. I was more playing with other children rather than listening carefully because I found it very boring. But I always had more of a kind of holistic viewpoint, that yes, this kind of the net of life, like a whole interconnections of everything. And I'm closer to more of quantic theory of energy circulating in beings and either visible or invisible. And about religion, I would say that I also have a kind of holistic viewpoint from a kind of religious Catholic education at school. And I felt that it was very limited because my grandmother, also because it was her education, asked me to make my communion. And I wanted to please her, but like 2 weeks before the communion, I told her, I'm sorry, I don't want to disappoint you, but I don't feel in accordance in doing it, because for me, it's really limited to believe in just one God and in just a book and a kind of dogma, which is for me too narrow. And also I realized what human beings are able to make between each other to destroy each other in the name of God and also in the name of this religion and others. And it doesn't feel right for me. So I don't want to have an etiquette, as we say in French. Yes, I don't want to belong to a certain movement, which can also make things that are for me not right. But what I believe that there is good things in everything. And this holistic viewpoint of religion I have is more that there is common ground. I also put in my PhD on animal welfare law is that we feel this notion of respect for all beings at the very root of each religious text at the origin. The need to respect life is at the basis of every religion and philosophy. I mean, it's global everywhere in the world, and it's very ancient. So we cannot say that it's like a new mode and that it will pass and it's something from the 2000 and so on. No, it's something really old and really global already.
Yeah.
So this is very interesting. And this is something I think should be developed again, this solidarity, charity, compassion vision of the world.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that's been fascinating as I've been working on this sentientism idea, is finding how deep and various the roots are, both of the naturalistic way of thinking, but also that more compassionate, we are all connected, all living beings matter perspective, that sense of compassion and connectedness, as you say, is very old and predates all of the modern religions. And it's flowed through them, I think, in helpful ways, but it predates them all, has deep ancient roots. And I think it's easy to understand why that might have come to be evolutionarily, because there are themes in, non-human animals and in ourselves that have developed us in a way that recognize the value of cooperation and connection. And that's clearly not perfect, because at the same time, as you say, we also have tribalism and aggression and, negative aspects as well. And I think what you said is very wise, right? That there are common themes, good and bad, that flow through both a religious, maybe a more holistic and a naturalistic worldview. There's no sort of perfect answer, and good and bad themes can run through many of them. And it was interesting, you framed that conversation by talking about you believe in what you can see, but also things that are obvious to you that maybe we can't see. And you talked about the soul of your cat, and you talked about a sense of everything being connected and there being relationships between everything. And it's interesting because I think that's another area of rich commonality, because I have quite a hard-edged naturalistic scientific point of view. So that if I talked about looking into the eyes of the puppy behind me and sensing a soul, what I mean by that is I have a very rich, powerful sense that she is having experiences, right? So that's it's another sentient being that has a perspective, that has value. So that might be what I mean by a soul, whereas someone else, when they use the word soul, might mean something magical or mystical. And in the same way, when we think about everything being connected and there being relationships between everything and we're all connected, some people might see that in a more magical, supernatural way. And I would see that in a sort of Carl Sagan, we are all stardust, we understand chemistry and biology and physics. We are really all interconnected and related sociologically and biologically and in terms of ecosystems. So I think there's commonality there as well. And I don't want to press you too much on this, but which version do you think yours is when you talk about soul and reverence and everything being connected? Is there something supernatural and maybe a little bit mystical there for you? As well as the sort of naturalistic, I believe what I can see stuff?
It's a very good question. Thank you. Honestly, I never thought of putting it in words, but it's an interesting exercise. For me, when I say I see the soul of my cat, when I look into her eyes, it's more to say that I know that the being I see has a consciousness, is conscious, and I can see what I see through her eyes. Like she's a bit of a mirror of who I am. So I see that she's not a human being, but I see that there is some similarities that I can see objectively. And I see that when I cuddle her, she's liking it as a baby human. I see that when she has something in her hair and I had to get rid of it, she doesn't like it as if it would be in my hair. This is something I think we can see objectively since a very young age. Afterwards, yes, for the interlinkages and so on, I'm not close to mystical theories, but yes, I feel more close, as I previously said, to a more quantic theory of the circulation of energy, that we have energy to live. All living beings have energy to live, and that this energy is transforming all the time. And there is exchanges of energy, and it's circulating. It's not standing still somewhere. If we would be, I don't know, a battery but a battery is also energy. So there's energy everywhere that we can see with a fire, which is a bunch of hot energy, and some we cannot see, but we can feel really. When we are in love, we feel this energy. It's strong, but we cannot see it. So it's more in this way that I would say that there is powerful energy that we cannot see, but which we can obviously say they are real because we can make the experience of them, or because we see at a global level that everything is interconnected, because something happening in China has now a global impact. So we are all interconnected. We cannot avoid this evidence anymore between the animal kingdom, the human kingdom, and the nature.
The universe is teaching us that lesson over and over again. Yeah. And I like that. I like the way you frame that, because again, I think even a completely naturalistic worldview recognizes that many of the most interesting entities in our world aren't fixed lumps of matter. They're more like patterns or flows of energy or flows of information processing. In a way, I think that's what human beings and other sentient beings are. They're better understood as a pattern or a wave or a pattern of information processing rather than a fixed chunk of matter, which generally the more boring things are made of. So yeah, well, that's fascinating. Thank you. And I think you've already started to hint at how that way of thinking about what's real relates to our second question, which is what matters morally. Some of my guests have had a more religious worldview, and in a way that defines their morality because it gives you, a list of rules or God to comply to or a standard to live up to. Other people take different approaches. So it'd be interesting to understand how the philosophy you've laid out there, and it sounds like the time you spent with your grandmother and her worldview, how that's influenced what matters to you morally. So I guess there's two questions hidden in this one. One is, what's the grounding of your morality? What does good and bad mean to you morally? But the second one is, which types of entities warrant moral consideration? Because most people have compassion, but the important question is, okay, but who do you have compassion for? Is it just for your immediate family? Is it for the human race? Is it for all sentient beings? Is it for all living things? Is it for the entire ecosystem? So I'm interested in both those questions. What's the grounding of good and bad for you? But also the journey you've gone on about which beings get compassion from you.
Thank you for your question. I had the chance to grow up in a family who cared for human suffering, obviously, because my mother was a full-time nurse by vocation as well, because she wanted to help humans to suffer less. So because of that, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother because she was very busy caring for humans. Yeah. And I had the chance to also develop this sensitivity for animals. And since a very young age, it was the same for me to see a human being suffering, an animal, or like a tree dying because people taking branch of it. I felt that this living being was not treated properly when it was cruel act, of course. I had this sense of empathy and kind of compassion. I grew up with a dog, a German Shepherd, from whom I was very close. Here as well, he was a grand brother for me. We had a big complicity and playing all the time. And for me, yes, he needed the same consideration that I could receive. Another experience, which was very important for me, when I was 4 years old, I was brought to a bullfighting event here in the south of France, where I grew up, and still there is bullfighting happening. And so I was very young, and I saw an animal, so here a bull, who was needlessly tortured to death for the only pleasure of some spectators. And since this very age, I felt really ashamed of my own species, which was for me not human at all here. And so I was brought to several bullfightings, and I was between 4 and 5 years old.
Yeah.
And as I wanted to intervene because I felt it was wrong, I was said that it was like in Disney movies, that it was all fiction, and it was a kind of teddy bear, and it was not blood, but like jam and strawberry jam or whatever. And people were amused and laughing. And so I was said, oh, celebrate like everyone, have fun, say hola. And but then there was an accident, and the bull hurt the torero. And as my mother was a nurse, she was asked to intervene in emergency. And I was back to the kind of hospital there in the arena, and I saw the bulls back from this place to be at the butchery. So they were hanging on the chin, dead, and a lot of blood. And I was really shocked. And I understood it was not fiction, it was reality. Yeah, so I was asking back my grandmother if it was real what I saw, and she said yes. And then, yes, from this age, I felt it was not fair. And I felt that these animals needed some people to defend them from cruelty. And since then, I felt it was my moral duty to help them and do my best to prevent any avoidable cruelty and suffering from them.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've mentioned suffering and cruelty many times. So it seems like that's quite central to your morality. And it's very clear that at an early age, you extended that compassion, way beyond the human species. And it's fascinating because lots of young people and young adults do grow up with a sense of reverence for nature and some form of appreciation for non-human animals. But quite often that's framed in quite a human-centered way, right? So we might revere nature because we enjoy watching it and because we like the wildlife documentaries and because we enjoy the aesthetics of the wild. We might see animals as in the bullfighting, as objects to be exploited for our enjoyment or to be experimented on or to be used in some ways. So there is an interest and a fascination in non-human animals, but it seems to get perverted or warped in a way. Whereas yours, that sense of empathy and compassion and identification with the individual seemed to cut through with you quite early on. You really identified with the animal on the other end of that experience. So yeah, that seems distinctive. And one of the other challenging things for many people is when they recognize that, I guess, moral worth in animals, non-human animals, is to apply that consistently across different categories, particularly where those categories impact on their own personal lives in some ways. So for many people who would share your and my compassion, sometimes that's still quite partial. Companion animals, certain types of wild animals, but it can be a real social challenge to apply that to farmed animals, for example. So how have you gone through that journey of, I guess, applying your compassion more practically in your life? And has that been a difficult journey or an easy journey?
It was both, actually. It can sound paradoxical, but it was not easy in the sense that I grew up in south of France, and in France it was not the more progressive place to to be vegetarian or even vegan very early. But I remember that when I was young, I told my mother that I didn't want to eat animals when I understood where my meat came from. And so she said that I would probably have vitamin deficiencies or this kind of thing, and that it would not be good for my health. So that it was not in question, and it was not an option. And I remember I said that when I would be 18 at my majority, I would become vegetarian because it was important for me. So at my 18, I went to the doctor and I said, I want to become a vegetarian. Please tell me how I can do to replace meat and fish and everything that I would not want to eat. And she said, no, it's not possible. Vegetarian for now. It was 20 years ago. She told me, no, there is too much, deficiencies and so on. So it's not healthy. You cannot do that on a regular basis or even on a daily basis. And then I went to Canada for making my master's studies in international environmental law. And there was already a big vegetarian community there. And it was very, very, very okay and very promoted even to eat more healthy and more vegetarian. Fortunately, there I could begin to become vegetarian. And then, yes, I progressively go until my PhDs to avoid any kind of animal suffering in my daily choices. And of course, to become more pro-vegan. And yes, so on a daily basis is, of course, through food products and also not cautioning some activities, food, and of course all products, non-animal products and non-tested on animal products, of course, and not going to zoos or to marine lands or like the things that we can make the world a better place if we make other consuming choices. So it was the way I put it the most in practice, and I would say also in my work, because my work really focused on improving the law in a global sense for more protection of our fellows and all of them. We know that at least every vertebrate and some invertebrates are sentient. There's no point about it. It's scientifically proven, but nonetheless, they are the most exploited and killed every day for food, for experiments. For food, it's 100 billions, and experiments, it's millions. But still, most of them are proven to be sentient, and the law is still really late to really protect their welfare. We begin only to recognize that they are sentient beings and that their welfare need to be protected, but we are far from protecting their interest for life, for being free, and for being well treated as we are now with humans. And it's not still ideal for humans. In some places of the world, there is still a lot to do to make these human rights implemented, and we are on the way for animals to better protect them, because I'm convinced that we cannot go back. We can just continue to evolve in this sense, because the consciousness is rising for animals, for animal protection, also through the laws. It's very well reflected. My only concern is the time it takes for the people and the law to evolve.
It's always too slow. And I guess that's the final part of the conversation we'll come on to now is how do you think about the future? Because the themes of your work play into that very strongly. And it was interesting how you talked about how different it was being in the south of France to being in Canada, because that sort of social context you're in, whether it's advice from doctors, whether it's friends and family, whether it's availability of products, whether it's social normalization, can make such a radical difference to how difficult or hard it is to make these types of changes. And that can be true in a sort of religious to a naturalistic context, but it can absolutely be true in terms of trying to cut out animal products and trying to expand your compassion, a broader scope. That can either be quite natural and easy, or it can be extremely difficult depending on the social context. And hopefully there's a positive feedback loop in that some of the changes you started to hint at there, as those changes happen and the acceptability develops, it will become easier and easier for more people to make positive changes. But your work's been fascinating in at least two respects. One, because of the role of the law in not just following change, but also driving positive change, but also in the work you've done around global governance and looking even at supranational structures and trying to shift them to take the interests of non-human animals more seriously. And it would be fascinating to know your thoughts about how those two fields have developed and where they can go next, because obviously the book you wrote, your thesis, centered on a review of animal law and legislation around the world and how it's evolved. I guess to start that conversation, do you see the development of law and international governance for non-human animals as a continuation of what we already have underway for humans? Or do you see it as a distinct effort? How closely do you think they link?
I think that there is similarities as justice movements. So it's also a social justice movement really progressing. My view as a whole is that we had laws. It's my personal theory that I didn't develop in my work, but it's interesting to talk about it. And I will talk more about my own work afterwards. And I like this question of how I see the world later for animals and talk more about a vision. But the linkages I see with human rights and human justice is that from a law point of view, first the laws were made by white men, right? So white men. And then the rights extended to other men, other races of our other colors of people, and the end of slavery. And then the rights extended to women. And then they extended to other sex. And then they extended to other ages. So to children and to seniors, to people who are not able to defend by themselves, right? Animals who cannot defend by themselves, because a lot of people say as a strong argument that they cannot talk, so they cannot defend by themselves, so they cannot have rights. But babies are disabled people who cannot talk. Is it the reason why they shouldn't have rights? So it doesn't make sense. So yes, so I see that it's an extension from one category of humans to all humans, to all humanity, towards maybe now, as we are seeing, evolving to all animality, to all the animal community, where humans are part of from a scientific point of view. So that's why we're talking more and more of humans and non-humans.
To coin the term sentientity, which I don't think is going to work because it's got too many syllables. But again, it's similar to animality, right? The idea is we go from humanity and we broaden it out to include all sentient beings. And I guess The only difference between animality and sentientity really would be
some unicellulars or some. I'm not sure they suffer, but
you might have questions around sea sponges. But if you want to go really sci-fi, you might also want to think about artificial intelligences or maybe alien intelligences that could be sentient at some point. That's a philosophically interesting area. But the priority is clear, right?
Yeah, sure. Yes, it's very interesting. So I see it more as an expansion.
Yeah.
And we see the same phenomena is in animal laws, because they started with sometimes some categories of species or animals, like companion animals, and then to farm animals, and then to wildlife, and then to animals in experiments, and then to vertebrates in experiments, and then to some invertebrates, which are proven to be sentient, like cephalopods. So we see that there is a growing expansion of the scope of legal protection and concern for animals. And so to more species, to more activities, to more interactions between humans and animals, as far as it can cause prejudices to other beings, which are not fair. So which the law has to regulate for it to be more fair and more ethical, because I think that ethics is taking a growing importance also into the legislative process. At least for animal protection, it's obvious now, beyond science, which was the first motor for conserving endangered species, and then to prove the suffering of some animals. And I think it's also this way of consideration we can lead to more protection of animal interests, as we are protecting human rights, because it's also an ethical point of view to say it's because we are similar and we have similar interests. We all want to live and to be well treated and to live as free as possible, that we have to respect this common will and needs of life.
And there's so many different approaches within the law, and I'm very much an amateur, but there seem to be some approaches which are about preventing cruelty to animals, and that tends to focus on companion animals. There are approaches that focus on personhood, so they might work with maybe the great apes and elephants and say, look, these are so similar cognitively to humans that we should actually grant them personhood, which only focus on a very small range of animals. But the idea then is to, again, extend and broaden that out. There's the potential to have legal constraints around animal agriculture, which normally are extremely weak, because the laws are really there to enable animal agriculture to continue rather than to protect the animals. And there's, I guess, also environmental law, which is more tangentially focused on animal well-being, but you can use environmental law to help make it better for non-human animals as well. So there's so many different themes of the law. Do you have a sense of which are the most productive, or whether it's a question of try all the approaches at once and all progress is positive?
Yes, that's my thinking. I really believe that all these changes are positive, and that we should continue to work on all fronts, because they are all very important, and everyone is doing their best in the animal categories or fields of the law that they feel more able to make positive changes. From my very global, holistic viewpoint, this is what I would say, and I would also say that it's also good to influence the global to the other level. So I really think that they are both needed to make national progresses for this kind of expansion, also geographically, because there is more and more countries adopting anti-cruelty or animal welfare laws. So it's good news as well. And also to have the global governance in big intergovernmental organizations, and even the United Nations, gathering the 193 sovereign states of the world, to make animal protection and animal welfare in interest a real universal concern, to be considered in all politics of the world, because also of the interlinkages existing with environment and human health, because they are now very obvious.
Yeah.
You were talking of farmed animals, and we know that factory farmings are environmental disasters, and that consuming wildlife is a disaster for wildlife and for human health now. So since a long time we know that, but now it's obvious globally. So it's really time to act and to take actions to really change these behaviors that are not sustainable at all for
So in terms of
life on Earth.
In terms of legal strategies, I, as an amateur, I share your view, right? Let's just pull all the levers at once and see what works and just keep driving things forward. And I also like that approach of thinking about it as an extension of what we're, the incomplete progress we're making with humans, because while there are obviously some, differences between the different species, and there are differences between us and non-human animals, in many cases, the most important things are the things we have in common. We all want to be free from physical pain. We all want the right to continue living. We all value family and social connections. We all need food and water and shelter, right? And the most important rights and interests and needs in human ethics absolutely apply to non-humans as well. It seems odd to me to suggest that humans are so radically different from non-humans because of the more esoteric things we might be interested in that non-humans aren't, when the most fundamental interests and the most fundamental needs are the ones we share. And it's obvious why that is, right? Because we're evolved apes and we've evolved on this planet with all the other non-human animals. So it's somewhat understandable, a great deal in common. So intellectually, I know it does make sense to focus on specific animal topics, but generally, I quite like the idea of just taking these human concepts and extending them further. And that's another area where I agree with you. We should pull all the levers at once, right? Is at different levels of government. There can be local, immediate things that people are doing. There's some interesting petitions going on at the moment in the UK where people are lobbying their local councils to refuse planning permission for new pig farms and new rabbit farms, for example, at a very local level. So we do not want this here. It's awful for all sorts of reasons. But then you can go up the levels, obviously, to regional governments or national governments, which arguably hold probably most of the power in today's dynamic. But I'm also fascinated at that next level up, partly because it hasn't been perfect, it has problems. But I do think what's been done on a global level through the United Nations, concepts like the Sustainable Development Goals, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights after the Second World War, those things are by no means perfect, but I think they've had an enormously powerful positive influence on infusing into positive pragmatic change, legal and practical around the world. So I'm really interested in whether you, one, share that view, but also your thoughts about how we can work at those international levels through some of the things you've done already on CAHP and the new initiative.
Yeah, UNCAP.
Yeah, and the new
UN Convention.
Yeah, so I'm fascinated. What I guess one, do you share that sort of optimism that there's some really worthwhile change that can be driven at that level? But also, again, is it a question of doing something separate for non-humans, or can we be even more radical and extend some of the existing stuff? It's a little bit silly, right? But I rewrote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as the Universal Declaration of Sentient Rights. And I've had a go at reworking the top level of the Sustainable Development Goals as the Sentientist Development Goals. And so, look, let's just redo these and imagine we did it not just thinking about humans, but we did it thinking about all sentient beings. And there are differences and difficulties, but for the vast majority of those documents, it just worked. It was quite a natural extension. That might pragmatically not be the best way of taking things forward, but it was an interesting thought exercise at least. So anyway, I should stop rambling on. What's your perspective on global governance for non-humans?
Yes, it's very interesting. I would be careful from a perfect or very direct analogy because by definition, every species has its own specificities. So we do as humans and other species. For example, we cannot pretend to fight for the right to vote for mouses or for mice. Sorry, it's my French speaking. But yes, apart from that, as you said, from the needs that we have in common and what a good life can be defined, at least to be free from suffering and to be able to express our natural and physiological and ethological preferences and even social species preferences. It's very important to take it into account beyond the vital needs of having a proper food, water, and shelter. And yes, so this is for the analogy, but of course, I did this exercise of also making an analogy of the crimes against humanity, defined by the High Court of Justice, which is a UN also organism. And if you take the list of the crimes against humanity, it's like really surprising how much they fit with what we are making to animals every day all around in the world. Sequestration, when we put animals in cages, killing, of course, when we kill them for any reasons, and even genocides. Now we know that when more than 1 million species are extinct now. So it's massive genocide of other animal species. And of course, torture when there is still vivisection or bullfightings or whatever torture, needless suffering imposed on animals for some human interests that are pretty controversial. So yes, it's also why I think ethics is really important to also help the legislator to make progress. So the science is, of course, super important to prove that, and science is proving that more and more species are sentient. So we now have a guess that some insects can also be considered as sentient beings. So we also expand the field of this Sentientism and of sentient beings. So it's really fascinating. And as for how it works at the global level and its influence, for me, I think that the environmental concern, when I began my master's thesis in international environmental law, it was 15 years ago, we barely talked about environment and environmental protection. It was more the thing of ecology. It's the kind of hipsters of the 70s and still in France and a bit in Europe, but it was an emerging concern in other countries, more protective, again, as animals, Anglo-Saxon countries in particular, and some German countries and so on. But it was also because we made environmental protection a universal concern at the UN that we are now talking of environmental protection all around the world, and that it's a real political concern to achieve the sustainable development goals, and sustainability as a real serious concern. And I believe, but I'm also convinced that it's the same which is happening now with animal protection. Yeah. Because this concern is emerging. It's getting stronger also in the national laws all the time. So new laws appeared when they didn't exist before in some countries. New laws are always reinforced. So it's according more protection to new species, to new activities, to new interactions, making penalties stronger. So it's really going in the sense of going to be more protective, because there is a social demand that cannot be ignored by the politics, and the politics who adopt the law. Yes, it's going too slow, as you said before, for us who would like it to go faster, because as we know of the lobbies and the strong economy and other organisms that have no interest for animals to be better protected. On the contrary, I would say. So he's okay, I think.
She's agreeing. Luna is agreeing.
At the global level, I think there is a lot to do. And if we manage, and we will, it's a question of time. It can be in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. But I know that it can just go this way for animal protection in the sense of individual animals and protection as sentient beings to be considered universally through. There is already animal welfare standards adopted by the World Organization for Animal Health. And now there is a resolution which will be proposed next year for animal welfare at the UN. And there is already the UDAO, the Universal Declaration on Animal Welfare, which is also proposed, and the Convention for later on, because it's a legally binding instrument. So states will take more time to accept to the to adopt a stringent instrument on this topic, but we will go this way, I'm sure, because we cannot go otherwise with what we know now and with the convergence of all the most dramatic global issues.
Yeah.
Climate change, environmental pollution, human health, and the extinction of biodiversity are all connected also with what we are doing to animals. And that's the very thing we now know, because there's a bunch of scientific studies on that and so much examples of what's happening every day because of this ignorance. Because for now, animals have been left aside from the global puzzle.
Yeah.
We have, and it's normal because thought of us as humans and protecting humans. And then we saw around and we are destructing our environment and it's turning against us. So we have to protect our environment if we want to survive. And now we see that what we are doing to animals is also turning against us, so that we also need to care to take into account animal protection if we want to survive. Even without caring for animals or having this sense of respect or even love for animals, we are all able to see with our eyes that it is important for our own survival to change our relationship and our everyday behavior as a human collectivity, because we have solutions to do otherwise.
Yeah.
And the only way to be implemented at the global level.
I think you're right. There's so many pressures pushing in the same direction. Of course, there is, I think, developing ethics around non-human sentience, but all of those other selfish human reasons you laid out are pointing in the same direction too. So it does feel like that pressure is building inexorably, and that has to then be reflected through the practical initiatives that you talked about that are coming through the UN and these other NGOs and organizations. So it's encouraging to see that those things are coming to fruition in the next few years, and hopefully we'll see them being, formally agreed and implemented as well, because obviously enforcement is as much of a challenge as agreement. But it's from the conversations I've had, which have included a few people from the legal world, I guess I started with a fairly naive view that the law, as you've implied, follows political will and culture and where social norms are, and then law can come in and respond to that. And that pressure is deeply important. But it also seems that the law can actually play a leading role at the same time and actually shifting and influencing public opinion and politics. And that's particularly true at the global level. And I think you can see that in what we've done for human ethics. And hopefully some of these international instruments and organizations can have a similar effect, not just responding to public pressure, but also leading public thinking. And one of the interesting ways I think the law can do that is by forcing us to be more consistent. So one of the things that you've touched on already is that us humans are very good at inventing categories to serve our own purposes, right? So we go, those species are invasive, those species are farmed animals, these species are charismatic wild animals that we like to see on our nature programs, and these are our companion animals, and we can use these categories in quite convenient ways. And one of the risks is that even as we see all these different swathes of legal and governance mechanisms moving positively, I think there's still a real risk that what we see in those really just reflects human interests. So you can see it in some of the initiatives that have been proposed and put forward already. You'll read their mission statements and you'll read their values, and they talk very expansively about welfare and well-being and sentient beings and recognizing the moral worth of those things. And you read down a little bit until you get to the section where they talk about animal farming. And all of a sudden it's, we want to make sure that while they're waiting to be killed as children, we make them comfortable. And I'm like, okay, something's gone wrong there again. So how do you think we can manage that risk that all of these wonderful initiatives that are supposed to be genuinely helping non-human sentient animals end up just being diverted to reflecting what humans want to do, which often is to carry on exploiting as we are, with a bit of ethics washing and greenwashing to make us feel better? How do we manage that risk?
I'm not sure I have a solution about that, but I think that the more people will get conscious and sentient themselves about what happened to to animals and what we're doing, the more the consciousness will continue to rise. And I really believe in the consciousness of the new generations to continue the evolution or even accelerate the current process for this rising consciousness for animals and animal protection and the need to consider our fellows. I think we will always probably have this kind of marketing arguments that animal welfare is protected, whether it's absolutely not the case, because they have a slightly bigger cage or whatever, or a bit more food in their cages, and so animal welfare is protected. And so we have these wonderful advices on TV screens that's where we see animals in nature and whether they're raised in cage and intensively, and there is no common point with the reality. So I think that humans, for businesses and other reasons, will always try to pervert the consumers and make them buy what they want them to buy. But I also see, as you and I know, really, that the consumer also has a huge power to make things change, because some big businesses are now taking the chance of being more green, really, and more protective of animals, but really. And so there's a new rising society, in a sense, which is coming to life. And we can be really happy about that, because we were not really helped by our politics or by the leading firms or corporation having the main businesses. It's really the consumer choices, in my sense, who made the biggest progress, helped by some NGOs. But it's really like here the power of the people, which is still alive. And this is where we can be, I think, optimistic and positive, because even if we sometimes feel that we are powerless to make things change because of the power of the lobbyists and the huge lobby, which are blocking animal protection laws and impeding them to evolve or to be adopted. Same at the United Nations, because it's a huge political organism. So we have the same powers in the room. You have the pro-environment, pro-humans, pro-animals, and you have all the opposite who are not really interested to have more protection because it cannot be really in their interest. But I think it's evolving. And again, I'm really optimistic in the sense that we cannot go back. The only concern, I guess, is that we are going too slow, and that too many people are looking at what is happening without really taking into consideration their personal power of having a positive impact on this change. But I'm also convinced that the new generation is growing with this new reality.
Yeah.
And will probably continue this beautiful progress. And at the global level, yes, I'm convinced also that animal welfare at least will see the light at the UN very soon, if not next year, very soon, but probably next year. Also, thanks to the One Health, One Welfare concept, because now we are really aware of these connections between humans, animals, and nature, and the global health of all beings.
Which brings us back to your first comments about the connectedness of all things.
Yeah, sure. This is bringing us to us. And the United Nations Secretary General last report is stating the need to live in harmony with nature by 2050. And the states are urged now to go this way. So if we have to live in harmony with nature in less than 30 years, we have to begin now to make big changes and big progresses. Also to live in harmony with other species, because it's very important. So yes, I'm pretty positive for the future, and I hope we will move on fast and far enough.
Yeah.
To be happy of ourselves.
That's probably an optimistic note to end on. It sounds like there's so much progress happening in the law. There's progress happening that we can look forward to at the UN level in international governance. And I think you're right. There's a lot of hope with the younger generations coming through, because they think in a very different way. And that's always been a positive force for change and human progress. And I think it will continue. We just, as you say, we just got to go faster. Got to go faster. Yeah. Are there any other things you'd like to layer into the conversation before we wrap up?
I would just encourage everyone to be conscious, more conscious as far as possible of the chance we have to live in this beautiful world and to be surrounded by so much beautiful people and other living species, to just take the time to look at them and to do our best to protect what we can protect, and beginning with ourselves, to be careful for ourselves and our beloved ones, and if possible extending our field of consideration to other living beings.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be mine.
I like it. Yeah, we if we're going to have universal compassion, we need to have compassion for ourselves and the people around us and the people we disagree with, and hopefully all sentient beings.
Thank you.
That's a great aspiration.
That's a very beautiful conclusion.
I'd also echo what you said before, that we also just don't underestimate your own influence and your own power. Yes, we're only one amongst 7.8 billion people, and that can feel like a tiny thing. But as a consumer, as a voter, as a employee, as a letter writer, as a petitioner, as a campaigner, we can have influence.
As a businessman,
as a
banker,
as a shareholder, as a pension holder,
can make a change.
Yeah. We can push and nudge all of these institutions and systems.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Everyone can push the right button. Everyone has choices we can make every day, and this is very powerful. And I really believe in this incremental approach of the baby steps we make every day, which make in the end a huge change.
Yeah,
so,
I love it.
Yes,
inspiring.
Thank you.
What's the best way of people following you, learning more about your work, and also what you're going to be doing with the Worldwide Federation for Animals as well? I can include links in the show notes, so don't worry. But where would you point people to go follow you?
Yes, thank you. So I'm on LinkedIn, where the main information on my work. I can also be reached by email on globalanimaljustice@gmail.com. And yes, the World Federation website for animals website is WFA.org. This is the website of the World Federation for Animals. And yes, and I would be glad to continue talking and receive information and stay in touch of your great work.
Yeah, please. Well, thank you so much. It's been an honor to have you as part of the series. And hopefully every one of these conversations helps to nudge a few more people towards rational, compassionate thinking. So that's the plan. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your work.
Likewise. Thank you. I'm looking forward to keeping up to date with your progress. Yeah. Thank you again. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye, Jamie.
Bye.